We're experiencing an epidemic of loneliness right now, and it was already bad, but when the lockdown started in 2020, it got much worse. And if you're like a lot of people, the way you've maybe always struggled to connect with people took a hit then, and it hasn't gotten easier yet. Conversations with people feel like they're fake, or they're halting, or stilted, or awkward. Or maybe you aren't good at small talk, so it's hard to get to know new people. Or you're good at small talk, but you're finding that other people get uncomfortable and conversations that start on a good note just kind of sputter out quickly. And you're standing there in an awkward silence. As hard as it can be to do well, being able to talk to people is fundamental to having a connected life. Learning some basic strategies to open a conversation, to make people feel interested in you and want to talk to you more will serve you all your life and have the added effect of helping other people who might be wonderful potential friends. You'd be helping them to feel better about themselves. And this is good for everyone, because the reason so many of us struggle is that without realizing it, we're stopping good conversation before it starts. Do you ever feel like you've done that? You might or might not be aware of it in yourself, but we're all aware of it when it's done to us. So let's talk about these things that we all do sometimes that function as conversation stoppers. And I'll talk you through them, and then I'll go over how you can modify these conversational habits and become someone who puts other people at ease and brings out the best in them. That happens to be the ideal way to begin friendships. Now, some of these will sound very obvious to you, but it pays to remember what not to do. Okay, so here are common ways that we inadvertently shut down a conversation. One is you miss the cue that someone is trying to connect with you. So let's say your friend is having you over for a birthday dinner with her other friends, and you're standing in the living room and someone comes up and says, "So, how do you know Kristen?" And you give them a one-word answer, work, and then you just look down. And you just stopped a conversation. You may have thought their question was just a request for information. I've met her at work. But what that person actually gave you was a conversation starter. Now, maybe they felt awkward, or they thought you looked like you didn't have anyone to talk to, so they made a bid to connect. Now, a bid is a concept from the Gottman Institute, and this is a group of people who teach about how we make bids for connection. And they do this normally in the context of romantic relationships, but the concept of bids applies to any relationship, even with strangers. So in this example, the bid is asking, "So, how do you know Kristen?" It's a softball question. It's an opening for a conversation that allows you an easy way out if you want to be left to yourself, which is what the one-word answer is likely to accomplish for you. Or it's an opening to chat for a little while. So you might say, "Well, I met Kristen at work. We used to be on this team, and we had this horrible boss." Oops. Now here, this is where you have an opportunity to avoid the second conversation stopper. So you might say, "Oh, I met Kristen at work. We used to be on this incredible team, but we had this horrible boss." And here's where you have an opportunity to avoid the second conversation stopper, which is talking about negative things too early in the conversation with something like, "Well, I first met Kristen at work. We were on this great team together with this horrible boss, and Kristen stood by me when he fired me." It might be true, it's a good thing to say about her, but it just leapt over the gate of small talk into topics that are for people who know each other better. And I know getting negative is tempting, and it's easy to do because grumbling about things can be an easy way to connect with someone. Misery loves company. Even if the conversation eventually makes you both feel depressed or unsafe with each other, because that's what happens when you hear someone else volunteer negative information about themselves or other people. So when you're just getting to know someone, share information that's positive or neutral or uplifting, like, "Isn't Kristen great?" So that way, at first, you stay away from stories of hardship and terrible bosses and earthquakes and crime and childhood trauma and the world's going to hell in a handbasket and all that stuff. These are all small talk topics that ever so slightly make everyone feel down and anxious. So when you know a person better, you can talk about negatives and the past. But honestly, if you're casting your line out like a fisherman, with negatives, the fish you're going to catch, the friends you're going to make are people who like to get negative. And you are only watching this video, I know, because you're trying to improve your life and have better friendships. So you can seek out positive people by focusing on positives, praising things, expressing appreciation, seeing the bright side. I know that that feels shallow to some people, like it's fake, but this is just an opener. These are good small talk openers. And even though they may not have the instant hook and intimacy of a really negative comment that the other person happens to agree with, they function as a placeholder or a space maker for the two of you to bond around where you're trying to go in life. Like once you've defined that, then you talk about, you get to know each other better, and then you talk about, here's what's hard for me, here's what I really don't like. And bonding around where you're trying to go in life especially applies to people who have had a lot of trauma in the past, which is okay. But bonding around trauma, which is what a lot of us have done in the past, we're like, hi, nice to meet you. You know what happened to me? Oh, me too. It was so bad. So doing that, it tends to lead to friendships that are fragile. Bonding around growth and healing is so much better for all that you're trying to do with your life. Okay, the third conversation killer is to lack curiosity about what a person is sharing with you. You listen, but you don't consider what they're saying. They tell you that they volunteer at an animal shelter, and you say, oh, that's nice. Well, if you want to help a conversation go next level, be curious. Ask them about that. What made you decide to do that? Is it hard when the animals get adopted and you never see them again? Do they all get adopted? Are there a lot of animals that need adoption these days? Do you get attached? Is it sad? There's so many things you could be curious about with people, right? The best conversations are like a balloon that gets tossed in a circle. Either it goes back and forth between two people or it goes around the group like this. But with each touch point of somebody adding to the conversation, the balloon gets a little higher. You don't shut the balloon down and somebody offers I volunteered at the animal shelter, and you go, oh, I had a friend who volunteered at the animal shelter. It was horrible there, The balloon didn't go anywhere. The balloon just stopped there. It's a conversation killer. So it's a joy to have the kind of conversation that goes up, like a slightly helium-filled balloon. And it's rare, especially when there are more than two people, but this is where new friendships can really form, because you're both learning something new and you're both in a project of conversation together. Okay, here's a conversation stopper that really aggravates me, though I'm sure I've done it. And it's when someone tells you something, like they've just been accepted to grad school, and you miss the cue that this is something to celebrate and ask them about. And instead, you tell a story about how this reminds you of when you were in grad school. Have you ever done this or had it done to you? It's like you're standing there holding the bag, embarrassed and disappointed with your news. Hey, I went to grad school. And then somebody is, talking about something else. And I had a coworker who did this endlessly. And I could share the biggest news, and all they'd hear is an opportunity to tell me about another person who had that happen. And I know the stories were meant as a way to say, I relate, but it made me feel completely shut out. I felt alone. I felt not heard. And this would happen in, telling good news and also bad news, like somebody in my family has cancer. Oh, somebody in my family once had cancer, blah, blah, blah. You just don't get heard in that way that constitutes somebody being present and sensitive to you with what you share. So instead, you can think of a conversation less as a way to tell people about yourself and more of a way to learn about another person. And this is so that you don't do that to another person. Just always be, what you're trying to avoid here is being interested in what they say so that you can say something that it reminds you of. So instead, you are focusing on what you can learn about them, including whether they're curious about learning about you. That's one of the things you learn when you kind of hang out and be present with somebody and ask them a few questions about things they introduce as important to them. And I know that not everybody is going to ask you about yourself. I know very well. And if you were neglected as a kid and no one was listening to you or celebrating your accomplishments, you might feel sensitive about this and try to push into a conversation with stories about yourself. And the reasons that we accidentally make things about ourselves are often totally innocent. But if you want to connect with people better, you want to aim for, 50-50 sharing. Not everything has to be you tell a story, then I tell a story. That structure, you don't have to follow it. You can do it sometimes. It's especially interesting to talk about ideas and phenomena outside of both of your lives and then pepper the conversation with personal stories. And that way you're opening a conversation and you're also sharing a little bit about who you are. It's a good mix. It leaves room for the other person to be part of that too. And in fact, that's more or less how I structure my YouTube videos, with that opening at the end to comment. And I know it's not really fair. I get to talk on the tape and it's, right there, at the very top of the screen, and the comments are down below. But it's participatory. I read all the comments. I respond to it over time. So the fifth conversation stopper is not waiting until you understand what the other person is saying before you speak. So you might think you agree, and then you say, oh yeah, I totally agree. But then you say something totally different to what they were saying. And I've been on podcasts like this, for example, where I'm asked something like, what's your take on internal family systems as an approach to trauma? And I say, oh, well, I can't say I resonate with it, but I know a lot of people I respect who consider it helpful and they say good things about it. And then the interviewer says, me too. I really hate internal family systems. And that's embarrassing for me because I didn't say that. I don't want to be known publicly as somebody who hates that. I'm totally supportive of what people do that, helps them heal. So, they didn't wait till they understood what I was saying before they chimed in with agreement. I love being agreed with, but not when it's something I didn't say. So they were just thinking whatever they were thinking. They weren't listening. And then they made everybody else think that I agreed with them. And actually, people who want to make you look like a bad guy will use this as a conversational malpractice technique, really. They're not innocently, where they ask you what you think about something, you say what you think, and then they rephrase it, reframe it, and make it into the thing that makes you look bad. And they go, oh, so blah, 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 blah. And, we've heard a lot of good examples of that. It's all over YouTube. I call it conversational malpractice. And it can be very damaging to other people. It's definitely going to push them away. So it's not a way to connect with people. It's a way to try to prove you're right. And seldom is that the most important thing in a conversation where you're trying to make friends. So when someone does that to you, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't make you want to share more information. It makes you run away from being friends. So if you want to master better conversational skills, listen to people, especially if you ask them a question. And be ready to ask more questions so that you can more fully understand what they're saying. Now, most people are really interesting if you pay attention in this way. It's a lovely experience to learn from another person and take what they say with openness. You don't have to agree, actually, to be open to try to understand and sort of see the picture they're painting of what they see in the world, right? And you can let it lift you up a little bit. And when you're up a little bit and you're paying attention, you can connect and talk together about what they're saying. And that makes people feel so heard. Everyone loves that. You will love it. That is what a conversation is. All right, the sixth conversation stopper is giving unsolicited advice. Unless a person you're talking to asks specifically for advice, just don't do it. And whatever your advice is, if it wasn't sought, it's very likely to be perceived as criticism. Now, sometimes people ask me, I really like what I learned from your video, or I'm doing your daily practice and I'm trying to get my partner to do it. How do I make him do it? And my answer is always, you can suggest to people one time and just say, wow, I'm doing this thing called the daily practice. I think you might find it helpful. Do you want to do that with me? And I just know from experience, chances are very good they'll say no. They'll say, no thanks, I'm good, you go ahead. And that's your answer. And if you're in a marriage or a committed relationship, like a very tight relationship, and something is really important to you, I would say ask once, and if they ignore you, you can ask twice. If you ask 3 times, that's the outer limit of how much you can ask somebody to change, really. And if they don't do it at that point, that is your answer. And I know that's hard to accept. It's hard for me to accept, but everything else is pushy. Everything else is trying to make somebody over into an image in your mind of who they should be, which is inherently a criticism. And people are not drawn to it, and it's a bad way to connect. I can sort of hear the voices coming of people saying, yeah, but what if what my partner is doing is unacceptable? And at a certain point, you have to decide whether you will tolerate this thing that you don't really like about them, or whether it's not okay with you, and you've asked them, they've said no, they're not following through, and you have to decide, do you want to be there? Real love it does include sometimes exhorting people to change, telling them what a big deal is. Sometimes real love means you step back and you separate because you can't deal with something that they're doing. And you have to ask yourself, do I really love this person as they are? Or do I need to adjust our living situation or our arrangement so that I can accept who they are or, move on with my life? And I hope that's not what happens. There's a lot of, wiggle room in there. But I'm talking about the way that we sneak in unsolicited advice is something that we really demand of another person, especially in a partner relationship. It can be really toxic. So it's a fine line, isn't it? It doesn't mean that you don't ever tell them, you know what, I just cannot deal with you drinking anymore. I really need you to stop. But if you've ever been in a relationship where something like that was an issue, that doesn't mean they stop. And then there you are standing with your ultimatum. So it becomes an inside decision. All right, but back to how to connect. How to connect, it does involve seeing people where they are, accepting them where they are, or, keeping your opinion about how they need to change minimal and releasing it if they don't choose to adopt your opinion. All right, the seventh conversation stopper. This is my pet peeve. Number 7 is what I call Dr. Actually, because actually, allow me to contradict what you just said or some tiny detail of what you just said. And I see this sometimes in the comments on YouTube and, where you're sort of trying to say, you're trying to make a case. Well, so this thing happens and the most important part of it is this. And Dr. Actually focuses on this little detail that you happen to use as an example and tells you what's wrong with that detail. And you're just feeling like, I didn't mean to call that little detail into question. I'm trying to make a larger point. Dr. Actually just can't do it. So, or they come in and try to debunk something that you said. So if I said, there are many methods that you could use to try to re-regulate your nervous system, and somebody came in and said, actually, there's only 2 ways to do it. And that might be their opinion and that's fine. But it's like, actually, there's only 2. And they are interrupting the point that I'm making that you have choices. There's, maybe I'm responding to somebody who has a preference that's different than mine. And I can say, there are many ways. So that Dr. Actually behavior, it's very common. And it's perceived as being a know-it-all, and it immediately shuts down the conversation. It's not the point the person was trying to make. It's a contradiction. It's being contrary. It's a refutation of what they were trying to say. And ultimately, it's not hearing what they were trying to say because you're down in the weeds trying to say that this little piece of what they said isn't legitimate. And you might be right. But if you want to connect with people, you got to just let these things go by sometimes, or maybe later go, by the way, when you mentioned brown sparrows, their migratory pattern is actually in the spring, not the fall, something like that. You can tell them later, but it'll just absolutely derail someone's effort to communicate and connect with you if you keep bringing it up. I think it's a reflex. I think a lot of people who do it, they're not doing it because they think they're a know-it-all. They're not doing it because they want to derail the conversation. They just have a low filter on this thing in their mind that goes, ooh, that little detail that you just said, it's not true. And that filter's not there to just it's okay. You can let it go by. It's peripheral to the point that your friend is making. Does that make sense? Okay. So if you are giving an opinion, it's more fair game to say, okay, I hear your opinion, but I have a different opinion. And when someone is just innocently telling you about themselves, you want to take care not to get in there and stomp on what they just said. You don't want to correct them or contradict them or appear to one-up them. If somebody reveals a little fact about their life, if they say, you know what, I'm thinking of buying an electric car. You don't have to be Dr. Actually and tell them, actually, electric cars are not all they're cracked up to be. Why, blah, 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 You don't have to do that. You can go, interesting. You can ask them, what makes you interested in an electric car? What an interesting choice. Do you think it would be Would it help you with your commute? Would you use it for everything? What about long distance? You can ask questions, and that opens the connection and the conversation with the other person rather than shut it down with your knowledge of the downside of electric cars, for example. I really don't mean to bring up electric cars, but it's something that people debate, certainly, right? If you do the doctor actually thing, even if you're contradicting them about something they're saying that you in fact know is wrong, you don't have to go there. This is not a transportation policy conference. It's a conversation where you have the opportunity to connect and get to know another person. Does it really matter to you what kind of car they want? Probably not. And if you want to open the possibility of friendship, you can open up the conversation when they tell you about their thought about the car that they're thinking of by asking them about that. Seek to know their point of view when you're getting to know somebody. Not to be persuaded necessarily. This is not a contest. You don't have to agree in the end, but you're asking questions to know this person and to see if you can hear the point of why they told you this. And who knows, you might learn something from them. But that's not important. When we correct and criticize what other people are expressing, we may completely miss the point. And for them, that feels alienating, even humiliating, and it shuts down the conversation. And this is really the 8th conversation stopper. When you correct and contradict someone, it can embarrass them, especially in a group conversation. You can also embarrass people by being sarcastic or abruptly changing the subject or turning your attention away from them when they're in the middle of talking. You want to be sensitive to that. Kind people seek ways to help people feel included and appreciated and heard. There is a place for debate, but it's not when you're just getting to know someone and you're working on building a new friendship. Okay, the 9th conversation stopper is when you leave no room for the other person to talk. And yes, this happens if you talk nonstop, but it can happen even in balanced conversations. If you're an extrovert and they're an introvert, you will hear every pause that they have. Introverts pause sometimes to sort of process information, but we extroverts hear that as, oh, you're done talking. You're ready for me to say something. I've got something. As it happens, here we go. You might even feel uncomfortable during pauses. It's a little weird, when you don't talk that way. But some people only share what's on their mind and in their heart when there's a pause. So give it a try. See if the other person opens up. And if you realize that you've been doing too much of the talking, you can apologize and ask them for their opinion on something. Ask them for their take on whatever you were just saying. So finally, the 10th way to stop a conversation is by not showing other people in a way they understand that you're listening, that you're interested in what they're saying, and that you approve of them. Now, maybe you don't approve of someone and you don't want the conversation to turn into a friendship, but assuming you do, you are interested in friendship, you may need to intentionally show them these feelings by keeping eye contact, nodding, and saying friendly things like, I'm so glad you said that, or you have a really good point. If it feels artificial to you to give people this affirmative validation for what they're saying when they're speaking, chances are you really do need to add it to your repertoire of how you respond to people. Giving people a little validation and I get it, I hear you, good point, it really helps them. And it's a good thing to know how to do, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. A lot of people, because of past trauma or maybe neurodivergence or just having a stoic personality, they don't give very much affirmation to other people. And you might need to consciously pay attention to their vibe, the tone of what they're saying, so that you can at least roughly match their tone. Now, I've noticed that some people who are kind of stoic like that, and they don't tend to give praise, they still like getting praise. So I'm not saying manipulate them, but just like everybody, they like to be appreciated and validated, right? Not everybody has the social grace to give that to others, but you're learning it now. So, good things are about to happen around you. So I'm not saying be manipulative. I'm saying to keep in mind how helpful it is to people to see that you are listening and feel that you're on their wavelengths, and that you know and you appreciate what they're saying. It's a kindness, and this will attract into your life more friends than you know what to do with. So These are 10 conversation stoppers, and I'm sure you have more ideas and can share in the comments. And if learning better friendship skills in general is something that you're working on right now, I've got a free download on simple ways that you can do that. You can learn to be a better friend, and you can click on that right here, and I will see you very soon.